In the kaleidoscopic world of 1960s rock and roll, few figures stood out as vividly as Grace Slick and Jim Morrison. Grace, the formidable frontwoman of Jefferson Airplane, and Jim, the enigmatic lead singer of The Doors, were icons of a generation defined by rebellion, experimentation, and a relentless pursuit of artistic freedom. Decades later, at the age of 85, Grace Slick broke her silence, unveiling a tapestry of memories that had remained hidden from the public eye. Her revelations painted a portrait of Jim Morrison that was as complex as it was captivating. Their paths first crossed during the zenith of their respective careers. The San Francisco music scene was a melting pot of creativity, and it was inevitable that these two titans would collide. Grace recalled their initial meeting with a mix of amusement and nostalgia, describing Jim as gorgeous, but he was so screwy. Half the time you couldn't talk to him. He used himself as a human guinea pig. See how far you can push the human brain. One evening, driven by curiosity and perhaps a hint of mischief, Grace decided to visit Jim at his hotel, employing a secret knock, a rhythm known only to her bandmates. She was surprised when Jim opened the door without hesitation. What followed was an encounter that defied convention. Grace described their intimate moment as like making love to a floating art form with eyes, a poetic yet poignant reflection of Jim's otherworldly presence. Their night together was a whirlwind of passion and unpredictability. At one point, Jim, embodying the spirit of a wild animal, got on all fours and howled at the moon. Grace, unfazed, joined him in this primal expression, a testament to the unbridled freedom they both cherished. Despite the intensity of their connection, Jim never reached out to Grace afterward. She later mused, "I was kind of disappointed he never called back. Apparently, I wasn't his style." Their brief liaison was emblematic of the era, intense, ephemeral, and shrouded in mystery. Yet for Grace, it was a chapter that left an indelible mark on her soul. What Grace Slick would later reveal went far beyond a single night. At 85, she no longer held back. In interviews and memoir-style reflections, she peeled away the curtain hiding Jim Morrison's darker truths, the kind that never made it into glossy magazine spreads or trippy stage performances. According to Grace, Jim was not merely unpredictable. He was tormented. While the world idolized Jim as the shamanic frontman of The Doors, chanting poetry and seducing crowds into trance-like states, Grace saw the man who existed after the encore. The man who, in his silence, seemed constantly haunted, not by fame, not even by drugs, but by his past. Jim didn't just sing about darkness, Grace said with unshakable conviction. He lived in it, slept in it, carried it with him like a ghost that never stopped whispering. She recounted late-night conversations, ramblings and confessions that most would have forgotten under the haze of acid and scotch. But Grace remembered. She always remembered. One such night, while both were high on LSD, Jim spoke of visions. Not hallucinations. Visions. "The Indian's still with me," he told her. A reference, no doubt, to the infamous childhood story he often told, the one where he saw a dying Native American by the side of a highway after a car crash, his spirit supposedly leaping into Jim's soul. Some called it mythology. Grace believed it was real, at least to Jim. He wasn't faking that haunted energy. He believed he was the vessel for something ancient, angry, and cosmic. That's not something a publicist teaches you. That's something that consumes you. Grace also revealed a more disturbing truth. Jim had told her in fragments about an event from his youth, an abusive incident buried deep under layers of bravado and metaphor. He never named names, never gave full clarity, but Grace was certain. There was trauma in Jim Morrison's past that fueled the fire behind his lyrics and his self-destruction. He had demons he never exorcised, she said. He didn't want help. He didn't believe in therapy. He believed in burning it all down, himself included. Jim's legendary antics on stage were not merely rebellion. Grace now saw them as a cry for help. There was the time he purposefully provoked police officers at a concert until chaos erupted. Not for spectacle, not for headlines, but because, as Grace put it, he wanted to be punished. Jim thought pain made him real. Grace told of an instance during a joint tour where she found Jim backstage, bleeding from his arm, having punched through a mirror after staring at his own reflection for too long. He looked at her and said, "He's not me. He's who they want me to be." That moment haunted her for decades. Jim Morrison didn't die at 27. Grace once told a confidant. He escaped. That was the only way he could silence the noise. In the deep folds of memory, there was one night Grace Slick never forgot. One night that still caused her voice to tremble, even at 85. It was 1970, just a year before Jim Morrison would die in a bathtub in Paris. They had crossed paths again, this time in Los Angeles. He was heavier, slower, and even more unhinged than she remembered. The chaos had deepened. He was no longer the wild animal howling at the moon. He was something worse, something broken. Grace recounted seeing him in the back of the club, slouched in a booth like a man hiding from the light. She sat beside him. He barely acknowledged her. What followed was a disturbing confession, one that chilled her even now. "I don't want to be here when they forget me," he muttered. "I've got a plan. When the myth is bigger than the man has to die." She didn't understand it then. She thought it was poetry, another one of Jim's elaborate metaphors. But looking back, she realized he had made the decision. Right then, right there. His exit wasn't sudden. It was scheduled. "He told me death was his way of controlling the story," she said. "Not old age, not rehab, not irrelevance, death." But Grace didn't call for help. Nobody did. In that era, self-destruction was seen as performance art. The people closest to Jim mistook his cries for lyrics. Later that night, she followed him to the rooftop of the hotel. He stood barefoot on the ledge, arms outstretched, laughing into the wind. "The sky loves me," he whispered. Grace pulled him back. For a brief moment, he held her close, then pushed her away. "I can't be saved," he said. "You're wasting your hands." And that was the last time she ever saw him. Years after his death, Grace held on to something Jim had written in her journal, scrawled in a barely legible hand the night they tripped together in New York. She never showed it to anyone, not until now. It said, "My father tried to make me a soldier. My mother cried like I was already dead. I'm neither. I'm something else, something outside the walls. You can't cage poetry, and you can't domesticate thunder. If I vanish tomorrow, remember, I was never trying to be your idol. I was trying to outrun myself." Grace kept those words tucked away like a relic. Not for fame, not for gossip, but because they were the truest version of Jim Morrison she ever encountered. When he died, people mourned the rock star, but I mourned the boy who wanted peace and only found silence. She said this not in bitterness, but in sorrow, because Grace Slick knew the curse of understanding someone too late. Jim Morrison wasn't just a cautionary tale. He was a mirror, reflecting the price of freedom without boundaries, genius without grounding, and pain without healing. So now, at 85, Grace Slick speaks not to rewrite history, but to complete it, to fill in the blanks that fans romanticized and critics ignored. Because somewhere beneath the leather pants, behind the sunglasses, and inside the madness, there was a young man just trying to find a place where the voices would stop screaming. And in her own words, Grace concludes, "We were wild, we were free, but some of us were already dying before we even began." If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more daily videos. Thanks.